Hey, this is Jonathan Ariel. Today, I'd like to teach you how to set up a calculated question in Moodle. Now, calculated questions are probably one of my favorite features of Moodle, and it'll take the rest of this entire video to get through what exactly calculated questions can do, but the short version is you can write a calculated question and ask Moodle to pick numbers to insert into the question, and then you just teach Moodle the formula for the answer. So a student who sees the question multiple times will always get different numbers in their actual problem. Now, before we go into the settings that are needed for a calculated question, I want to set up the task that I would actually write the question for. So let me open up my whiteboard. Okay, so let's imagine that I'm teaching a lesson on right triangles, and I want to be able to give students one side of the triangle and the hypotenuse and ask them to solve for the other leg of the triangle. Well, this would involve the Pythagorean theorem, and so that's a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. And so in order to solve that, a student would need to be able to rearrange this equation that is b squared equals c squared minus a squared, and then they would have to take the square root of both sides, just like that. And so now that I've got this example, what we're going to be able to do is write a question where Moodle knows that the answer to the question is equal to this formula, and we can specify what values Moodle is going to use for C and A. So let's go back to Moodle and see how that works. Back in the Moodle course, I need to go into the question bank. And if you've watched one of my other videos, I definitely recommend setting up categories for all of your questions to keep things straight. So I've already set up a category for calculated questions, so let me go into that now. All right, so we'll create a new question, and I'm going to choose calculated. So I need to pick a question name. Now for this question, it's probably going to help to have an image. So I'm going to bring up that image of a right triangle. All right, there it is. And I'm going to make it a little bit smaller than that. So now I can start typing something like in the triangle shown below. And now I'm at a point in the question where I want Moodle to be able to pick a number to insert into this equation. So I'm going to build a wildcard. So I'm going to use what I call the curly braces, and I'm just going to simply insert capital letter A. So I'll keep going with the question, and I need to call that the C wildcard. And now I'm going to write the actual question itself. Solve for side B. All right, so coming down into the feedback, I'm actually going to leave that for now and come back to it. And the reason for that is you can put really specific feedback into this box. You can even build formulas that work out the math step by step. But if you run into a problem and you write something incorrectly, it's kind of difficult to distinguish whether you have a problem with the feedback formulas or the actual answer formula itself. So it's a better practice to just go write the formula for the answer. And then if that part works, come back and write the feedback next. So for the formula, let me jump back over to my whiteboard because it's a little bit easier to explain if you can see what I'm doing. So on Moodle, we're looking for how to type this expression into the correct answer segment of the question. And that's going to require learning a little bit about how Moodle operates with math. Let me open the Moodle docs for a calculated question. And if you scroll down a little bit on this page and look for available functions, so there's a long list of functions that you can use, but you have to know the correct abbreviation for it. And some of them are pretty Moodle specific. Like I'm going to scroll down to find this one right here that I need to be able to take a square root. And so that's SQRT. So if you need this list again, it's just the Moodle docs for a calculated question. And there's usually a link for that at the bottom of the Moodle page while you're writing it. So let's go back to the whiteboard. All right, so the first thing I would have to write for the correct answer is I would need a square root. So we've got the square root taken care of, but now we need to be able to write an expression for c squared minus a squared. So let's go back to Moodle docs and see how you square something. All right, so that is actually right here. If you need to take an exponential expression or a number raised to a power, you can write POW. And then over here, they give you a little bit of context that you're gonna write POW, parentheses, the number to raise. This is the wild card. I don't really know why they haven't used the curly braces here. And then comma, and what power you want the number raised to. Here's a better example right here. So let's go back to the whiteboard. So because I've got two different variables that I need to square, I'm going to put in parentheses, parentheses, and minus, and the other set of parentheses. So then we'll write POW, and we're going to put in curly brace C, curly brace, comma, 2. Now for A, I want to show you a different technique. We could write curly brace, A, curly brace, and then this would be the asterisk key, but on Moodle that means multiply. And then we'll just put in a curly brace, A, curly brace. Now personally, I use this method right here mostly, but most of the functions that I end up writing are raising numbers to the second or third power. And so it really doesn't save any keystrokes to use this method over here, but if you had to raise something to the 23rd power, you'd probably want to stick to this side over here. Now with anything beyond the simplest problem that you can set up in Moodle, you're probably going to find some issues with nested parentheses, and I can go ahead and tell you I've got one right here, because I've missed closing a parentheses somewhere along the way. So let me show you my technique for being able to count them out really quickly. This is parentheses 1, 2, and 3, and those are all opening parentheses, but now I'm going to count down because this is a closing parentheses, so that's 2. And then this is 3 again because we opened a new one. And then we'll count down 2 and 1. And if we leave this right now and we use this string of characters on Moodle for the formula, I guarantee you it's going to have an error. And the problem really happened because I think I forgot to write a closed parentheses right here that matches that set. And so now if I recount, that's 1, 2, 3, and then 2, 1, and then we're back up again, 2, and then 1, and then there's the final parentheses. Now, I don't always build things on the whiteboard, but when I set up complicated expressions for Moodle, I typically write out the formula on paper just so I can do things like this parentheses goes with that one and keep it all straight. So let's go back over to the Moodle. All right, so now I'm going to type in that expression. And one thing to notice here is that Moodle already has an equal sign for the formula. So if you type in an equals here, it's not going to know what you're talking about. And that's going to be really confusing if you watch the next video on the calculated multi-choice, because you're going to have to put an equals there. But I think there's a little reminder on that screen to tell you that. So let's just get started. We're going to type square root, and then I typically build these in the order that I wrote them. And so there's my total set of parentheses, and then I'm going to have 2 expressions inside of that. So you can write these on the fly. You don't have to write them down on a separate sheet of paper or something first. And so this is going to be the power, and then I have a open close parentheses, and I'm going to put in C and comma 2. And then I'm going to go inside this other set of parentheses and just type A brace times A brace. Now, an important thing to note is that if you just were to put A times A, like we can all read that and understand that wildcard is being multiplied by itself, Moodle will have no idea what you're doing there. And so if you're trying to do something like multiply, you have to be explicit about putting in the multiplication sign. All right, so let me make this bigger. Now I need to set the grade. That's the correct formula. And so the student should get 100% of the points. And then under tolerance, this is how close a student has to be to the correct answer in order to receive full credit. Now, there are a couple of options here, and the first one, relative, means that any answer that's within 1% of the correct value will be marked correct. I typically change over to nominal, and that means if the answer is 12, 11.99 and 12.01 would both be correct. Going back over to relative, I found that when I wrote questions with the relative tolerance, that means in absolute terms, the answer range is wider, but for smaller values, it's a smaller range. And that's just a little confusing to explain to students. And for my classes, I just prefer that they know that they can put in an answer to the 100th place and they're going to be marked correct. You can set how many decimals you want for the answer display. I'm going to leave it as 2. And then you can put in a specific feedback that the student might see while they were taking the quiz if they answered this question correctly. Now, we could move on with this question, but I do want to show you another superpower of the calculated question. Let me put in a blank for one more answer. All right, so I don't have any more correct formulas to put in, but let me copy this and paste it in. And now I'm just going to take off the square root part. It'd be really common for a student to be working on this problem and do most of the math, but then just forget to take the square root at the end. And so let me change that to nominal. And then I want to put in a feedback that says something like close, but you forgot to take the square root. And so that way a student would see that message if they were taking a quiz with a setup where they could see this feedback while they were still working. And that would give them a hint on what went wrong. All right, moving down. For unit handling, I'm going to leave that set as units are not used at all, but you can set a unit. And so if you'd given this question out and said that the sides of the triangle were measured in meters, then you can set it to the unit must be given. And then down under the units section, you can actually type in what you're expecting for the unit. But I'm not going to use that, so let me put that back to not used. And then notice all of this is grayed out. All right, last thing, under multiple tries, the default is set for 33, and that's on my Moodle server, but I usually like 50% better, but that's up to you. All right, so I'm going to save changes. Now on the next screen that shows up, we're not done with the question yet, but there isn't much to do here. I do find that the wording on this screen and the next one is super confusing, so let me just mention it now. You have two options here. And the default option just kind of sounds wrong. It says that Wildcard C will use the same existing private dataset as before. And that is confusing because you might be thinking, I've never set up a private dataset before, so maybe I need to use new shared dataset. So maybe the people who write Moodle could do a little bit better job there, but honestly, it makes sense after you write a few questions. What this means is that you're going to set a private dataset for this question to be able to pull values for wildcard C and A. And if you were to choose new shared dataset, what that means is you could write multiple questions with the C and the A wildcards, and all of those questions would pull from the same dataset. Now, I've written literally thousands of questions on Moodle, and I don't particularly like questions sharing their information. So I'm not actually going to do that today. I just want to stick to a private data set. So I'll also leave the synchronized data from shared data sets. We're not synchronizing anything. So let's go to the next page. All right, so let me scroll down just a little bit. Now this is the screen where you get to specify what values you want Moodle to pick from. And so it would be really important in a problem like this. For wildcard C, that was the hypotenuse. Well, it definitely needs to be longer than the A side of the triangle. And so I'm just going to tell Moodle that I want it to pick from a minimum of 10 to a maximum of 15. And I can specify how many decimal places I want it to show, and I'll leave it just set on 1. And then for the distribution, uniform just means it's going to randomly pick values between 10 and 15. But there is log uniform, and I think that has something to do with picking numbers more commonly at one end of the range. But I've never actually used it, so I'll leave it on uniform. All right, now for side A, I'm going to pick something like between 5 and 9. So it's guaranteed to be shorter than side C. And then I can scroll down just a little bit more. And I want Moodle to pick, let's say, 20 different sets of wildcards. So I'll click Add. All right, let's scroll back down just a little bit. Now, by default, Moodle's only going to display one of the sets of values that it picked, but you could make it pick all 20 and show them to you. And so here you can see the formula for the correct answer, and then it's plugged in 14.1 and 6.3, and it's worked out the correct value. And then here's the incorrect formula where we left off the square root, and it plugged in the same numbers here, and then got this for the answer. Now, before we leave this screen, let me show you a couple more things. Now that I've added 20 sets of wildcards, I could go back here and then change this. Let's say that I want it to be 20 to 25, and I want the A side of the triangle to be 15 to 19. Well, now I can come back down and add 20 more sets of wildcards. Now Moodle's always going to show you the last set, and so here it's picked 23.1 and 17.5. Now you can also go in and you can delete all the wildcards in chunks, but right now I want to delete all 40. And then the last thing I want to show you, let's say that I want to add new wildcards, but I want them to be this set of variables. Well, let me come back down and just click on Add One. And coming down here to the set one, notice here that it picked C and A. They don't match that second set where I raised the values, and that's because of this setting right here, force regeneration of all wildcards. So let me delete this one set, and then with these settings right here, the higher numbers, I'm going to come down and I'm going to force regeneration of all wildcards, and then simply click Add 20 sets. And let's go down to the bottom, and you can see here that it picked correctly with that new higher set of ranges. So that's a little bit confusing. Right now I want to save changes, and then let's preview this question to see if it even worked. Let's work that out. That's 22.7 times 22.7 and minus 16.2 squared, and we'll close that. Let's see if that works. 252.85. Ha! I forgot to take the square root, but here's my message that says, hey, you forgot to take the square root. So let me finish that up. All right, so the answer is going to be 15.90. And in this case, because it's a 0 in the hundredths place and I set the tolerance to be 0.01, I can actually just skip typing in a 0. Awesome, I got that question right on the second try. Now before I close the preview, I want to show you a couple of things. On this type of question, where it's pulling from sets of wildcards, notice we have the question variant. So if I pick the drop-down list, I could pick any of the 20 wildcard sets that I generated. Now let me close that, and let's go back into the question settings. And I'm going to come down here to the answer formula. Now I kind of said that we were going to skip the general feedback, and that was because of problems that could happen while you're writing the formula. If you wrote the formula and there was something wrong with it, like you left off a parentheses, let me just show you what that looks like. I'm going to go save changes, but it's going to generate an error. Moodle has come back with this note that says illegal formula syntax starting with square root, parentheses, and then there's nothing. Moodle's pretty powerful at doing calculations, but it is pretty terrible at telling you what's wrong when there's a mistake. And so sometimes you just have to start back on paper and build the expression until you get it right. So let me put that back on. The point is, once you've written the formula and the question correctly gets past this screen and lets you pick wildcards, then you're safe to come back and start writing feedback. And this is the really powerful part of this question, is you can work out the math step by step in the feedback. Let me show you what I mean. All right, so I put in one line showing the Pythagorean theorem, and I just typed that in with the text tools, but you could take a picture and insert it. But there's also another way to set up some complicated math, and that's with the equation editor. Now, I've never actually figured out how to use this, so I'm not going to try here in this video. But if you're a math teacher, you might have a little bit more luck with it than me. So let me move on with the feedback and expand a little bit. So I've got in this problem, you could plug in the values given and get this result. And so now you can go in and actually insert the wildcards themselves. So I can say C squared equals, and I got to go back and make that a superscript. And then I can just copy paste that, change that to be A, and then I copied the equal sign so I wouldn't have to change superscript back to regular, and that would be minus, and then I would just put in B squared. All right, from here we can make Moodle work the math out step by step. So I'm going to copy this first part, and then I want Moodle to square both of the values and show it on screen. So this will require a new step. I'm going to write an open brace, equals, and a close brace. And then I'm going to come down to the correct answer formula and just copy this part that involves squaring C. And I'll paste that right inside. And then I'll keep going, and open brace equals close brace. And I'll come down and copy A times A. And so what that open brace with an equal means, it tells Moodle to look at what you're typing inside of those braces as not just a wildcard, it's telling it there's a formula that it needs to do some math. And then when the feedback window displays, it'll actually have the worked out value for these calculations. Now I should probably add a little bit of text right here between to explain the steps. And then I'll add another line here, and then I'll copy this part, and then I'll open another brace equals, and then I'll close that. And then I'll come down to the correct answer and I'll copy all of this and put it inside of this. Now I just need one more line of text, and I can say B equals open brace equals close brace, and I can copy the entire answer formula and paste it inside. This is why I really recommend writing this formula and getting Moodle to accept it as a correctly written formula, because after that, you can simply come back and paste it in small chunks into the feedback. And it's a lot easier than trying to figure out where you went wrong in some of these steps along the way. So let's come on down and we'll save those changes. Okay, and Moodle came back with a mistake already that we have an illegal formula syntax starting with open parentheses. And this honestly took me a minute to find. It's actually right here. There's an open parentheses that doesn't have a matching close parentheses. When we check the other ones, we've got 1 parentheses, 2, and then counting down, that's back to 1 and 0, and then 1 open and 1 close, so that should be fine. And then this one, I took this directly from the correct answer formula here, so I know I'm good. Let's try that again. All right, once we get to this screen, there's really not anything else we need to do. You can just click on Question Bank, but many times that'll take you back to the main question folder instead of the folder we're already in, so it doesn't really save time. So now I'll come all the way to the bottom and save changes. And then we'll just preview the question. Now I'm going to use Submit and Finish, and it'll simulate turning the entire quiz in. All right, and down in the feedback, we've got all of the things I typed in as text, but notice that everywhere else, Moodle has actually substituted the values in for the wildcards, and then we've got some math that's worked out for intermediate values, and then the fully worked out answer is here, and then of course we set it to display 2 decimals for the correct answer. So this is all I wanted to show you here. Let me close this preview. Alright, so that was a lot of work to create one question of the calculated type, but you could quickly make a copy of this question and then change the formula and possibly how the wildcards are picked, and you'd build up a pretty good library pretty quickly of this type of question. I hope this video has been helpful for you today, and as always, thanks for watching.